A door slams open. Police storm inside. And what they uncover stops them cold: rows of cannabis plants worth over £1.2 million, fed not by bills and meters, but by a hacked power line stolen straight from the street. Flashes of chaos, sparks spitting from live cables in Middlesbrough. A man's skin burned raw after a botched connection. High-vis jackets moving through the daylight like they belong there. They looked like everyday road crews. Harmless men in fluorescent jackets. But for 4 years, they weren't fixing cables. They were powering a nationwide drug empire, hidden in plain sight. Andrew Roberts and Ross McInn didn't look like career criminals. On paper, they were directors of a small company, Elevate Civils and Utilities, based in Wigan. To outsiders, they were respectable businessmen, two men with branded vans, LinkedIn profiles, and staged job site photos that showed them as hard-working tradesmen. But behind the photographs and paperwork lay a secret empire. They were the men who could turn the lights on. Every cannabis farm needed power, industrial levels of it. Without it, the lamps went dark, the irrigation failed, and the profits vanished. And while Albanian gangs controlled the drugs, Roberts and McInn controlled the currency. This was the niche they carved out in Britain's underworld. At first, they moved cautiously. Their company looked legitimate. They registered it properly. They bought vans. They ordered uniforms. They even updated their social media with snapshots of supposed roadwork projects. To the public, they appeared as yet another small construction firm working Britain's endless cycle of repairs and upgrades. But the truth was far darker than anyone imagined. Instead of fixing roads or laying pipes, Roberts and McInn sent their teams to splice into the national grid itself. By hacking live electrical supplies, they created secret pipelines of power that fed into more than 100 illegal cannabis farms. Farms hidden inside pubs, department stores, nightclubs, even residential homes. The risks were enormous. One wrong cut of a cable could kill instantly. In fact, government investigators later confirmed that several workers were left with burns, scars, and near-death injuries from explosions underground. Yet Roberts and McInn pushed ahead, fueled by rising demand. And that demand was huge. According to police intelligence reports, organized crime groups from Albania had been flooding the UK with cannabis since the late 2000s. Their model was simple: industrial farms, trafficked workers, and huge profits. But without electricity, the model failed. And so, Elevate Civils became a hidden partner in one of the fastest-growing sectors of Britain's black market. But here's the twist: this wasn't a gang operating in the shadows with weapons and threats. It was something more unsettling. It was men in high-vis jackets. The same uniforms people pass every single day without thinking twice. Neighbors saw them digging into pavements, fitting cables, and setting up barriers. No one ever questioned it. Why would they? The company name was printed on the vans. The workers had clipboards, signage, and even hard hats. Everything looked official. Every farm they connected grew the power of Albanian criminal syndicates. Every van ride, every fake job, every wire stripped bare on Britain's streets pushed Roberts and McInn further from businessmen, and deeper into organized crime. And while the profits were real, so were the dangers. Explosions underground. Fires ripping through houses. Entire neighborhoods are at risk of blackouts. And yet, for 4 long years, no one stopped them. But that silence wouldn't last forever. Because in a small high street in Bangor, one suspicious discovery was about to tear down the mask of legitimacy that Roberts and McInn had built so carefully. The first step into crime rarely looks like a leap. For Andrew Roberts and Ross McInn, it began with something deceptively simple: digging holes in the street. On the surface, these were just jobs. A few cones. A roll of plastic barrier tape. High-vis jackets that blended in with the endless noise of Britain's infrastructure work. They looked official, behaved official, and, most importantly, nobody ever asked questions. Neighbors walked past. Drivers slowed but carried on. To the public, it was business as usual. But beneath the asphalt, something else was happening. Instead of repairing or laying new utilities, Roberts and McInn's crew were splicing into live power cables, dangerous, high-voltage lines that fed entire blocks of homes. From there, they ran covert connections into nearby properties that had been converted into cannabis farms. The setup was quick, often just a few hours. By the end of the day, what looked like a routine street job had secretly given a criminal gang unlimited electricity, for free. And with that, Roberts and McInn had found their formula. At first, they kept it small. One job here, another there. But word spread fast in the underworld. The pair weren't just reliable, they were invisible. Police didn't stop them. Councils didn't check permits. Residents didn't complain. They had discovered something rare in organized crime, a service that could operate in plain sight. But no empire is built by two men alone. They expanded their circle. Ground workers like Greg Black, Lewis Charles, and Aidan Doran joined the fold, men willing to dig, haul, and risk their lives in exchange for a cut of the profits. Each brought a different skill set, but together they formed the muscle of the operation. Then came Colin White. A former Scottish Power employee, White had access to specialized tools and insider knowledge that no street-level gang could easily obtain. Prosecutors later revealed that White supplied stolen equipment, gear designed to handle live electricity. Without him, the operation might never have scaled. With him, they were untouchable. The early results were staggering. Cannabis farms that once feared sudden raids or power bills exposing their operations could now run endlessly, uninterrupted, and at full capacity. Each successful hookup meant hundreds of thousands of pounds of drugs harvested, processed, and sold. For Roberts and McInn, the profits came not from the plants but from the wires. They charged gangs a fixed fee for each installation, money in hand, risk off their shoulders. And in those early days, detection seemed almost impossible. Imagine the scene, a quiet residential street in Wigan. A van pulls up. Men step out, dressed head to toe in official-looking uniforms. They unload tools, roll out cable, and set up barriers. To anyone watching, it looks like the council at work. By the time the job is done, the barriers are gone, the street is sealed, and beneath the surface runs a hidden artery of stolen electricity, feeding a house just a few doors down. Not one person reported it. Not one neighbor realized that what looked like civic duty was actually fueling the drug trade. But every success carried hidden dangers. Government reports later confirmed that several of these early jobs ended in disaster. Workers received burns from sudden explosions. In one case, a man's face was left blistered and scarred. The risks of tapping live, high-voltage lines were enormous. Yet Roberts and McInn pressed on, knowing the rewards outweighed the consequences, at least for now. What began with a few quiet jobs on side streets quickly escalated into something far bigger than Andrew Roberts and Ross McInn had ever imagined. The small Wigan outfit, once just two men and a van, spread across the country. Within months, Elevate Civils and Utilities had crews digging not just in Lancashire but also in Yorkshire, Greater Manchester, and Merseyside. And soon after, into Wales and Scotland. Everywhere they went, the formula stayed the same. Fake barriers. Fake signage. High-vis jackets. And the unshakable confidence that comes from knowing nobody was watching closely enough to question them. But what they were powering was no longer just a few houses hidden behind drawn curtains. In Liverpool, they lit up cannabis farms inside abandoned pubs, vast rooms once packed with drinkers now converted into growing chambers lined with foil, their kegs replaced by irrigation tanks. In Glasgow, entire floors of a department store were gutted, each window sealed, each corridor humming with the low buzz of heat lamps. Hotels, nightclubs, warehouses, even family homes, all turned into high-yield drug factories. And all of them kept alive by the stolen current Roberts and McInn secretly fed into their walls. Police would later calculate that more than 100 cannabis farms were connected through their illegal wiring. Farms that together produced drugs worth over £21 million. But this was more than numbers. It was a silent dependency. Albanian crime groups, some of the most ruthless in Europe, relied directly on Roberts and McInn. Without electricity, their farms died. Without Elevate Civils, their cash flow collapsed. And that gave Roberts and McInn leverage they never expected. For once, they weren't the small players bowing to gangsters. They were indispensable. The men with the golden key. But power of this kind always brings risk. Subplots began to form in the shadows. Some ground workers started whispering about the dangers. Stories circulated of botched jobs where sparks lit up the night sky. Rumors of men almost electrocuted underground, their screams muffled by the soil. And then there were the neighbors. While most ignored the roadworks, a few began to notice strange patterns. Teams arriving late at night. Jobs finished at an unusual speed. Van doors closed quickly when anyone walked by. It was only a matter of time before curiosity turned into suspicion. Yet, in those years of expansion, nothing slowed them down. By 2019, Elevate Civils wasn't just a front, it was an industry. Crews moved like clockwork, booked through coded messages and burner phones. Each job is mapped, scheduled, and executed with the precision of a legitimate contractor. To outsiders, they were still invisible. To the underworld, they were invaluable. And so, the rise continued. More farms. More profit. More electricity is bleeding out of Britain's grid and into the criminal economy. But every empire has cracks. And Roberts and McInn came not from a rival gang or a disloyal worker, but from something far smaller. In North Wales, on Bangor's High Street, sat a property that had been converted into a cannabis farm. On the surface, it was just another shop front, blending in among the rest. But this one would not stay hidden. Because what investigators found inside would not only expose one farm, it would unravel everything Roberts and McInn had built. By 2019, what began as a small-time operation had become industrial. Roberts and McInn no longer moved like petty criminals. They moved like contractors running a national business. Their network of vans and hired crews stretched across counties, Greater Manchester, Merseyside, Yorkshire, and North Wales, even as far north as Scotland. Everywhere they went, there were diggers, cabling, and staged jobs booked under the name Elevate Civils and Utilities. On paper, the work appeared routine. But in reality, every booking meant another cannabis farm secretly brought to life. The scale of power theft was staggering. Investigators later confirmed that some of the farms they wired up were consuming more electricity than entire housing blocks. Local grids strained under the pressure. Street after street experienced unexplained surges, sudden outages, and even fires. Inside these farms, conditions told their own story. Foil-lined rooms sealed to trap every ounce of heat. High-powered lamps glowing day and night. Irrigation systems dripping water into rows of cannabis plants that reached from wall to wall. The air was thick with humidity, the smell overwhelming. And hidden behind the crops, people. Trafficked workers, many from Albania, are forced to live on site in dangerous conditions. They slept on thin mattresses laid out on floors, often with no windows, little food, and constant risk of electrical fire. The farms were prisons, and the workers were unseen victims of an industry worth millions. For Roberts and McInn, the profits were mechanical. A single farm could yield hundreds of thousands of pounds in just a few months. Multiply that by over 100 sites, and the scale of their empire becomes clear. But with every rise comes a shadow. The more farms they powered, the more cracks began to show. Residents started reporting blackouts. In some neighborhoods, lights flickered night after night. In others, sudden fires ripped through buildings where hidden wiring overheated. Power companies noticed the patterns too. Consumption spikes that didn't match official usage. Losses measured not in hundreds, but in millions of pounds. And slowly, suspicion spread. Behind the masks of legitimacy, Roberts and McInn's empire was becoming too large, too noticeable, and far too dangerous to remain hidden. The silence that once shielded them was beginning to break. It only takes one mistake for an empire to start crumbling. For Roberts and McInn, that mistake happened on a quiet stretch of Bangor High Street in North Wales. Police officers, acting on a tip-off, entered what looked like an abandoned shop. What they found inside was shocking even by seasoned standards: rows upon rows of cannabis plants, sealed behind makeshift walls, fed by high-powered lamps and an elaborate irrigation system. The value? More than £1.2 million. But it wasn't just the plants that caught investigators' attention. It was the wiring. Instead of a legal supply, engineers discovered a crude, dangerous feed drawn directly from the town's underground electricity lines. Whoever had installed it had cut into live mains, bypassed meters, and rerouted the power straight into the shop. This was no amateur job. It had precision. It had planning. And yet, it left a trail. On CCTV, cameras from the same street showed a group of men working outside just days before the farm was discovered. They wore high-vis jackets. They put up barriers. And their vans carried the branding, Elevate Civils and Utilities. But when detectives checked with the council and local power companies, there was no record of any scheduled work. No permits. No authorization. For the first time, suspicion had a name. Elevate. The Bangor raid became the spark that unraveled everything. Investigators followed the trail back to Wigan, where Roberts and McInn ran their so-called utility firm. A warrant was executed, and what officers uncovered was damning. Inside the company's HQ, they found diggers, vans, tools, and bundles of stolen cabling. Maps marked with highlighted streets. Invoices for equipment. Even photographs taken at dig sites across the country. It was a blueprint for a nationwide operation. And there was more. At McGinn's home, police seized mobile phones loaded with incriminating evidence. Messages discussing jobs. Some talked about fresh installations. Others casually mentioned reconnecting grow houses that had gone dark after faults. One chilling image showed a worker with his face burned and blistered, evidence of the danger these crews faced splicing into live electricity. Another video captured sparks erupting from a pavement in Middlesbrough, the aftermath of a botched attempt to steal power. These weren't isolated jobs. They were patterns. Dozens of them. The deeper detectives dug, the bigger the picture became. Elevate wasn't a local scam. It wasn't a handful of illegal hookups. It was an industrial-scale service, stretching across 32 different police force areas in England, Scotland, and Wales. And the network ran like a business model. Criminal gangs paid Roberts and McInn a fixed rate for a connection. Elevate delivered. The growers planted. And the farms thrived, until police raids or faulty wiring shut them down. But with every recovered phone, every seized document, and every CCTV clip, the illusion of legitimacy was stripped away. For 4 years, Roberts and McInn had worked in broad daylight, hiding behind uniforms and road signs. Now, the very same signs and vans that once kept them safe were the evidence that would bring them down. And as investigators pieced together job after job, county after county, one truth became unavoidable: this was no longer about a single cannabis farm in Bangor. It was about a web of deception that had stretched across the entire United Kingdom. The walls of their empire were closing in. And Roberts and McInn had no idea just how fast the trap was tightening. Police realized this wasn't local. It was a nationwide conspiracy, stretching across 32 police areas, an empire built on stolen power and collapsing under its own weight. Criminals hide in plain sight every day. If you won't subscribe to stay alert, then drop a comment explaining why you'd rather ignore it, because silence only helps them. The Bangor discovery set the wheels in motion. Within weeks, police forces across the United Kingdom coordinated dawn raids, striking simultaneously in Wigan, Manchester, Liverpool, Glasgow, and beyond. It was a massive operation, dozens of officers, armed with warrants, kicking down doors before sunrise. Vans were seized. Diggers were lifted onto lorries. Bundles of stolen cable, worth thousands, were stacked in evidence rooms. Inside one warehouse, investigators uncovered a stash of safety signage, identical to what road contractors use. In another, they found fake job sheets, complete with forged logos and numbers. The illusion of legitimacy was gone. Cash was discovered, too. Not the millions reaped by the cannabis crops themselves, that money was long laundered, passed hand to hand, or hidden overseas. but enough in envelopes and bank transfers to prove a steady income from their underground trade. When detectives pieced it all together, the evidence was overwhelming. Dozens of vehicles. Thousands of pounds worth of stolen tools. Schematics for electrical bypasses. Maps showing where Elevate had dug. Photos of jobs in progress. And messages tying Roberts and McInn directly to the criminal underworld. But what made the case so unusual was the charge. This wasn't a drug trial. The men weren't growers, dealers, or traffickers. Their crimes were rooted in something most people never think twice about: electricity. The stolen power was the silent enabler of a £21 million cannabis empire. Without it, the plants withered. With it, gangs flourished. And so, at Liverpool Crown Court, the stage was set for an extraordinary case. Andrew Roberts, once the outward face of Elevate Civils and Utilities, stood in the dock and pleaded guilty. His defense argued financial desperation, that mounting debts and pressure pushed him into a world he couldn't escape. Beside him, Ross McInn appeared more visibly broken. At one stage, he wept in court, telling the judge he regretted everything. That the company he built had spiraled far beyond his control. But remorse could not outweigh scale. The judge delivered the sentences with precision. Andrew Roberts, 6 years. Ross McInn, 5 years and 4 months. Colin White, the former Scottish Power employee who supplied stolen tools, was handed 2.5 years. Groundworker Greg Black was jailed for 3 years and 9 months. Lewin Charles was jailed for 2 years and 8 months. Aidan Doran was jailed for 3 years. Jack Sherry was jailed for 22 months and suspended for 18 months. The sentences brought the curtain down on one of the most audacious energy theft conspiracies ever prosecuted in Britain. But behind the numbers lay human fallout. Workers scarred from electrical burns. Whole streets were left in darkness after botched connections. Families living above shops that were one spark away from disaster. And in the end, the irony was impossible to ignore. Roberts and McInn had built their empire by hiding in plain sight. Yet it was the very visibility of their vans, their barriers, and their uniforms that handed prosecutors the evidence needed to destroy them. But even as the men were led away to begin their sentences, one question lingered like a shadow: with cannabis farms still booming across the UK and organised crime groups still desperate for power, had the fall of Elevate ended the trade, or simply created a vacuum for the next players to fill? In court, the judge called it a mask of legitimacy, a large-scale enterprise. The danger was real: fires, explosions, and entire neighborhoods put at risk. Millions lost in stolen electricity, costs that trickled down to ordinary families. And in the shadows, trafficked workers trapped inside sweltering grow houses, living as prisoners in Britain's hidden drug economy. This wasn't the work of gangsters with guns. It was men in high-vis jackets, digging in broad daylight. And for years, nobody stopped to ask who they really were. 2 directors. Fake Roadworks. An empire worth more than £21 million, built in broad daylight and hidden behind the simplest disguise of all, a high-vis jacket. If men dressed as ordinary road crews could fool councils, police, and entire communities for 4 years, how many other criminal enterprises are hiding in plain sight right now? So don't look away. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the crimes you've just seen aren't relics of the past. They are still happening, closer to home than you might think.